Okay, I'm on. I'm in, yep.
Try and say something, please.
I'm here. I can hear fine. I'm good. Ready to go. I is the link working? I'm looking at it on another page. Okay, I'm looking at the link. Is it working now? Nothing's coming up on the link. Okay, there I got it. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, not a problem.
Um, yeah, people can
Okay.
only hear Shaun. I think that's really good. So Shaun, you can hear me, but no
I
one else can.
Okay, so just if anyone, for all those who are logged in at the moment, we're just setting up the technicalities of the PowerPoint that's going to go along with the talk. Okay, not a problem. If it doesn't work, I can share via the Skype if you want. I can share my screen with you. That might help. Yeah. So how about I do that? Okay. Can you see my screen now? Okay, great. So let's start. You can see me? Okay, great. So then we can start. Okay. So, Not a problem. Okay, we just had a few technical hiccups. We'll be starting in a few minutes. On the screen, everyone should see what we'll be speaking about: the role of Danish-funded NGOs, political discourse, and ties to terror. Okay, Jonathan, you ready? I'm going to start. Okay. Okay, we're ready to go. So, we're going to spend hopefully the next 45 minutes or so speaking about Danish-funded NGOs, political discourse, and ties to terror. Okay, I'm just going to turn the sound down here. Okay. NGO Monitor is a research institute that was founded a little over 15 years ago with the idea of monitoring and looking at the power and influence of non-governmental organizations that are active in the Arab-Israel conflict. Over the last 15 years, we've developed a database of over 350 international organizations and a number of organizations that are based here in Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and a number of organizations that work internationally but also do significant work here with regards to the conflict. And what we noticed very early on is that a number of politically active NGOs that have significant political motivation, use the terminology of human rights or human rights discourse to try and pursue and effect political change. Specifically, what we will look at is European funding. And in the course of our research here at NGO Monitor, we look at about 100 million US dollars that go to political organizations, whether it's here or around the world, that are active in this area. Specifically, when it comes to Denmark, we look at about $10 million or about 60 million Danish crown that come to this region to NGOs, whether it's directly to NGOs or via Danish organizations. Now, before we get started into the meat, I'm going to speak about what we call funding mechanisms. And it's very important that everyone understands I'm going to be using 4 terms to explain funding mechanisms and how funding comes. And these 4 terms are important to understand the way money works with regards to non-governmental organizations and human rights activities. The first is direct funding. Direct funding means that it's money that comes directly from a government ministry or government institution or from an embassy. This is money that will go directly to a non-governmental organization, and we're going to indirect funding. Indirect funding is money that goes from a government agency to another NGO or to a church human rights organization, and then comes back to another local non-governmental organization or NGO. So in the case of Denmark, the largest indirect funding activist we're going to speak about is Dan Church. Once we've spoken about funding, it's also understand that there are 2 ways that funders will fund NGOs. Yes. Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm just saying to Shaun that he has an echo on him. Do you know why you have an echo on you? Because when I can hear you perfectly, but it seems like everyone else has an echo when I check the YouTube feed. But other than that, you're doing great, and thank you so much for being here.
All right, well, I've turned my microphone away from you, so this might help. Is
Yeah,
that better?
yeah. Keep talking. I'll say to you something wrong.
Okay. So let's go back. We're speaking about core funding. That is funding that goes to an organization to support what's called core activities, basic administration costs, paying of salaries, facilities, money that basically the organization can use for almost anything that it sees fit. The next type of funding is what we call project funding. And this is funding that will go to an NGO for a specific project or task. And this is usually restricted funding. It's restricted to a specific type of project or a specific type of task that the NGO has been told to undertake or has agreed to.
I'm gonna have to stop you again. We have an echo. We have an echo problem, and I have no idea where the echo is coming from. It's probably me. Um. So I'm probably gonna have to do something at some point because I can hear. It's not you. Problem here is me.
Okay,
Um, I think.
let me try what I might be able to do then. Hold on, let's try something different.
Please.
What if I speak like this? Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, hold on.
Let me see if everyone else can hear you perfectly.
Is that better? Yeah, now you can hear me better. I've got headphones on. Yeah. Okay, I think we're better.
No, we are still getting the echo.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Dina is saying I'm the only one who gets a.
You're the only one that's getting an echo. Okay, so we'll keep going.
Keep going. Sorry about that, people.
Not a problem. Okay, so let's quickly recap. We spoke about direct funding, which is money that comes directly from the government or government agency to a non-governmental organization. Indirect funding, which is funding that will come from a government agency to a local organization in Denmark and then to local NGOs here in Israel or the Palestinian Authority. The two kinds of funding we'll be speaking about are core funding, which is funding that goes to an organization to support core activities, salaries, administration, or anything else usually that the NGO sees fit. And finally, we have project funding, which is funding that will come to an NGO, which is usually restricted to a specific project or activity of the NGO. Okay. The two major organizations we're going to be speaking about are the Danish government and Dan Church Aid. Or please understand, I'm not going to be able to properly pronounce. I think it's danske Folkekirken. But
yeah, we call it Folkekirkens Nødhjælp.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dan Church, as is well known, they have an average income of about 650 million crown, about 215 million, give or take, depending on the year, comes from Danish, what's called Danido or Danish aid, meaning that's taxpayer money, plus another 2 or 3 million that comes from the lottery fund. And then another depends on the year, another 70 to 80 or 85 million per year that comes from the European Union. Again, we're talking about taxpayer money from Danish taxpayers and from the European Union. Interestingly enough, I often go onto Dan Church Aid's website because they do incredible humanitarian work around the world. A couple of months ago, their website, when you click on Israel in the Middle East or Israel and Palestine specifically, looks something like we have at the bottom here, where it says Dan Church Aid has worked among Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank since the early 50s. And what do they do with their aid? They focus on relief aid, women's rights, improving living standard for the Palestinian population, and advocacy. Interestingly, more recently, they've updated their website, so it looks like this. What do we do in the occupied Palestinian territories? Now, immediately they speak here about Dan Church working in the Palestinian territories since 1948. Now, interestingly enough, the fact that they speak about the Palestinian territories in 1948 already somewhat makes some type of political statement, in that from 1948, the current areas that are known as by Dan Church as the occupied Palestinian territories, specifically the West Bank, was occupied by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was taken over by Egypt. But also when we look at what do they do here, they're very open about it. They work very closely with local partners, livelihood protection, active citizenship, and again, advocacy. So again, an organization that provides significant resources under the name of human rights. We see there's a lot of activity here that is more about advocacy. And we're going to get into that in a few minutes. The next thing we're going to look at is a direct funding mechanism from the government that comes in the form of what is known as the Human Rights and International Law Secretariat. And this is a combined funding mechanism between Sweden, Holland, Switzerland, Denmark, and at one stage Norway, but now they have pulled out. And this funding mechanism provides over $20 million to various NGOs. The reason we use dollars is because we're speaking about Swiss francs, Swedish crowns, Danish crowns, and euro from Holland. Now, this mechanism, set up at the end of 2013, initially received input of 3.6 million Danish crown, plus another commitment of at least $8.3 million that the Danish foreign minister signed a few months ago. But it appears that that is on hold, and I'll explain why very soon, because of many problems that were discovered with the Secretariat. Now, it's very interesting to note that the Secretariat, which we said is about $20 million, the overwhelming majority of that money goes to NGOs in the form of core funding, meaning, as we said before, core funding that can be used for virtually any activity within the NGO, up to about 50% of its annual income. When we looked at the core recipients, we looked at 24 NGOs that received this money. We immediately found that 15 of the 24 openly support and advocate for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel. So we have a huge chunk of Danish funding that is going to support the everyday activities of non-governmental organizations that are active in international boycotts of Israel. In addition to that, we also see that many of these organizations are very active in what we call lawfare, which are legal attempts not only to boycott Israel, but also to have Israeli officials tried at various courts, including the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So in essence, what we have is a situation where many European leaders, including your own government, often speak about not supporting BDS or putting up a sword and claiming they don't support the BDS dragon, but in reality, they're fueling the flames of boycott, divestments, and sanctions against Israel. Let's look at some of the examples of these organizations that we've been speaking about. An organization by the name of Badil, which claims to be a refugee information organization, receives core funding from the Secretariat of $260,000, plus core funding from Dan Church of 300,000 crowns every year. Interesting to note that Badil openly advocates for the right of return of Palestinian refugees, and in their own words, wishes to create a de-Zionized Palestine of a single state. meaning they're quite happy to see the removal of the Jewish state of Israel, in addition to their support of BDS. And interestingly enough, they've also openly rejected all peace proposals that have come up, including the roadmap and the Arab Peace Initiative, because they said it still left room for some type of two-state solution. Now, more troubling is they hold an annual right of return competition. And these are just some of the examples of cartoons that have come up over the last decade. On the far left, you can see an infamous cartoon that they published in 2010 with, we could call it an Orthodox Jew standing with a bloody pitchfork on the bodies of Palestinians. This cartoon was eventually removed after multiple outcries. And then in 2015, you can see the cartoon in the middle where we have a fist punching through the state of Israel. And then in 2016, another cartoon, again, where you see a right of return and a one-state advocacy. Now, in addition to all of this, we actually approached Dan Church and asked them what do they feel about this and does this fit with their human rights agenda? And on their website, they published a response. And the response was very detailed. It spoke about a number of other aspects as well. But when they were challenged about their 300,000 krona donation to Badil, they actually said over here, you can see I've highlighted in yellow, our support is earmarked, meaning that we do not support specific work concerning right of refugees in 1948. So here they're telling us that they support projects. They don't necessarily support this project because the money they give is earmarked. Well, interestingly enough, Dan Church, despite the fact that we may have some criticism for them, they actually publish their annual donations. And here we see 300,000 crowns to Badil. And you see here, they give Badil core funding, not project funding, not earmarked. It's core funding. So there seems to be some type of contradiction here between what Dan Church is saying and what they're actually doing. In addition to their defense of support for Badil, they also said, I highlighted here in orange, they said that the cartoon from 2015 was not published by Badil. They're referring to this cartoon over here, the one with a fist punching through the state of Israel. They said it was not published by Badil. Well, when you actually go to the website of where this first appeared, you see that it's from the Badil poster project of 2015, and the publisher was the Badil Resource Center, and the source and credit was sent in by the publisher, which is the Badil Resource Center. So again, we have an issue where it appears that Dan Church are not either aware of what is being done with their money, or there may be some discrepancy between what they say their money is doing and what is actually happening. Another example of an NGO that's highly problematic is an organization by the name of Al-Haq, run by a man by the name of Shaun Sacks. Shaun Sacks, according to the Israeli courts, is a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, a recognized terrorist organization in the EU, in Canada, the US, and Israel. In addition to being run by Mr. Jabarin, Al-Haq openly supports various aspects of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel. And they're a leader in attempts to have Israelis and Israeli figures tried at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Here's a picture from from Al-Haq's website, together with other NGOs, where they are handing in a request for prosecution of Israelis to the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. These figures here are other organizations that also receive funding from the Human Rights and International Secretariat, funded by Danish taxpayers. Moving on to another organization, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. This organization, in addition to receiving $710,000 from the Secretariat, also received last year 214,000 crowns from Dan Church. Now, according to Palestinian Center for Human Rights, based in Gaza, Palestinians have a legitimate right to resist occupation, and this means all aspects of resistance, including violence. In addition to their submissions to the International Criminal Court against Israel, Raji Sourani, the founder and director, also acknowledged that he was a member of the PFLP terrorist organization. And most recently, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights held a workshop where they actually lobbied against the cessation of funding to terrorists or terrorists in Israeli prisons. They claim that Palestinian terrorists or Palestinians who have been convicted of violent crimes and are sitting in jails deserve their stipends from the Palestinian Authority, and they're actively lobbying against any attempts not to give Palestinian terrorists money. And one of their claims is that if you don't give these Palestinian terrorists money, it's a violation of international human rights law. Another example is an organization by the name of Adamir. Now, Adamir is a prisoner advocacy organization. In addition to supporting Israel, calling Israel modern-day ethnic cleansing, so claiming that Israel is carrying out modern-day ethnic cleansing, and their support for BDS, their vice chairperson and a member of the Palestinian legislature is this woman by the name of Khalida Jarrara. You can see her there proudly being, where she's very proud of her membership of the PFLP. That's a PFLP flag behind her. Moving on to another organization. We have the Women's Center for Legal Aid Counseling. In addition to $710,000 from the Secretariat, they also received 200,000 crowns from Dan Church. And over the years, we've actually been looking at one of their researchers, a woman by the name of Manal Tamimi. And here are some examples of her Twitter and Facebook. She's spoken about how she hates Israel, hates Zionism, encouraging a third intifada, blatant Nazi imagery in the middle, speaking about Jews drinking blood. And these are just some of the examples over the last 2 years. Now, us as NGO Monitor and a number of other organizations that have what's called ECOSTOCK status or status at the United Nations, we sent in an official complaint about Manal Tamimi and some of her work. And as a result of that, the Women's Center actually submitted a complaint on behalf of Manal Tamimi, claiming that she was being targeted for her work as a human rights defender. So again, a woman who proudly displays blatant hate of Jews, severe Nazi imagery, even speaks about Jews drinking Palestinian blood, is regarded as the Women's Center for Legal Aid Counseling as a human rights defender. And this organization that calls her a human rights defender receives direct funding from the Danish government and core funding from Dan Church Aid. Let's move on to another troubling example. We have the Women's Affairs Technical Committee. This organization, again, in addition to supporting boycott, divestment, and sanctions and claiming that Israel has committed ethnic cleansing, a number of months ago, they opened a new women's center named after Dala Mughrabi. Dala Mughrabi in 1987 carried out a terrorist attack along the coast of Israel that killed 37 Israeli civilians, including 12 children. Incidentally, this is the picture at the opening ceremony where they're very proud of their funding by the Women's Center, which, as we said, received $530,000, a quarter of which comes directly from the Danish government. Important to note that this is one of the reasons why the Danish foreign minister actually has now ordered an inquiry into further funding because of this organization. And it's important to note also that the Norwegian government suspended funding to this organization and asked that their money be returned and that the Norwegian emblem that you can see on the bottom left be removed from this school. Another example of an organization is the Defense for Children International. Now, notice that all these organizations have great humanitarian sounding names. Women's Center, Palestinian Center for Human Rights, the Defense of the Children International. So here again, another organization that receives over $700,000. In addition to promoting BDS, they continue to promote the libel of a 2002 Jenin massacre. They're very active in the United Nations and the European Union. Their initial director, Rifat Al-Qassis, signed the Palestinian Kairos document, which is a church document that calls for significant action to be taken against Israel. And here's a very interesting example. One of their employees, Hasham Abu Mari, was killed in a shootout with Israeli Defense Force personnel in 2014. Soon after his death, DCIP, the Defense for Children International, put out this web post where they mourned the loss of their colleague who was killed by Israeli forces. But at the same time, the PFLP put out a press statement calling him a commander who was martyred by the Israeli Defense Force. Important to note, who is the Popular Front that we've been speaking about, the PFLP? Well, they were founded in 1967. As I said before, they're designated a terrorist organization in the US, in Canada, Australia, and the European Union. They're adamant about not recognizing the State of Israel. And just last week, after we had the horrendous murder of 3 people in Khalamish, PFLP put out this statement saluting the operation in Khalamish. As we already saw, many of the so-called human rights groups have active members of the PFLP. Another thing that we often need to look at with regards to human rights organizations is transparency. What are they actually doing with their money? As I said before, Dan Church are relatively forthcoming about what they do with their money, and some of that seems to be in contrast to what they claim is being done. But here is something that we took from documentation provided to us by various authorities. How much money are the directors of some of these organizations making? Well, here's an example. The Secretariat, which we spoke about earlier, their initial director, their program manager, a man by the name of Mustafa Mari, who works at Birzeit University, makes on average $10,000 a month as the manager of the fund for the Secretariat. It's not all doom and gloom. It's important to note here for Danes, I think it's important to note that the Danish Foreign Minister immediately realized that there was a problem, and he ordered suspension of funding and an investigation into how Danish funding was inappropriately used, as we mentioned before, for the Women's Center named after the terrorist Dalal Mughrabi. It's a very good start. The problem is, it's all very well and good that the money is suspended or spoken about being suspended after the fact. We need to look at how the decision-making process got to the point where the money was already transferred, and then the Danish government realized there was a problem. In Switzerland, similar actions have taken place. In March and then again in May, the Swiss government voted to suspend funding to organizations involved in anti-Semitism. And the Dutch lower house also voted to review organizations that boycott Israel. Again, this is a non-binding motion in Holland, but again, it's very important. It's a very important first step. Our recommendations go as follows. Firstly, there should be very clear guidelines with regards to government policy and NGO funding. And that means the government needs to be very active in making sure that their policy is followed. In this region, for example, the Danish government is adamant and passionate about supporting a negotiated two-state solution. Well, if that's the case, then all funders should at the very least support that policy of Denmark. We can speak about many other actions and activities, but if Danish funding goes to support core activities of organizations that don't support a negotiated two-state solution, We have the absurd situation where Danish taxpayers are funding Danish organizations that fundamentally contradict Danish policy. Another major step would be transparency, not only with regards to how the money is being spent, but how was the decision-making process followed, and who was responsible for decisions that allowed organizations that supports terrorists to receive money in the first place. And will these people be held responsible for their possibly problematic decisions? We also think that any potential ties to terrorist groups need to be fully investigated so that the funding organizations or the funding governments can be held responsible for funding that may potentially go to organizations with terrorist ties. And important, I think, as we said before, Denmark should be commended for this. Any problems or any complaints or any potential ties to terrorism or anything else should lead to the immediate suspension of funding. To everyone who's listening, we often get the question, well, what can we do? Where can the average citizen take place? And what can they do? Well, first and foremost, circulate information. Our website is available. I can leave you all my contact information. We have vast amounts of information that deal with European funding and specifically Danish funding to problematic organizations, and we're more than happy to share it. All of it is available for the public and on our website. We are all blessed to live in democratic societies where we can raise these issues with our democratically elected leaders, and we can tell them, as our government representative, we are not happy with what is happening with our tax money. We want you to raise this issue and do something about it. And important, we need to demand accountability. The decision makers who allow this funding to happen, the organizations that are responsible, need to be held accountable, and this needs to stop. Whether it's writing letters, newspaper articles, emails, and actually being in touch on a daily basis with elected leaders. This is our website. We update it every few hours with new information. We have a pretty good search engine where you can actually search our database, not only by NGOs, but also by government funding. And again, if there's any specific information somebody needs, please feel free to contact me directly, Twitter, email. And we're going to stop there for now. I'm sure there may be questions. So I'm going to open it up. If anyone wants to ask any questions, know anything else, let me know.
Yeah, thanks. You can hear me. I hope everyone else can hear me too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I would like to know, before people get to, you can write in questions, you guys. The other countries that have had these more broader decisions, how did that come about? Was that pressure on government? Was it pressure on the officials in the ministerium, what we would call ulandsmidler? Or was it local, maybe more pro-Israel parliamentarians?
So the reality is it was a combination of everything. The Danish foreign minister came for a visit here to Israel, and during one of their visits, Prime Minister Netanyahu actually brought up the issue of some of the organizations that receive funding. Very soon after that, the Mughrabi incident took place, and then there was a combination of Israeli pushback and Danish media and work by Danish pro-Israel groups, and also politicians who are not necessarily concerned about the Israel-Palestine conflict at all, but they're very concerned about the fact that Danish taxpayer money is being misappropriated. So it was a combination of a number of activities that worked to the benefit of the Danish taxpayer, and I think that is possibly the best way to go. As an Israeli organization, I'm relatively limited appropriately that I can give out as much information as I can, and I can speak to organizations such as yours and other individuals. Occasionally I have the privilege of speaking to Danish decision makers, but at the end of the day, the responsibility for real action or for promoting action in Denmark will come from Danish citizens.
Great. Thanks. If you can just put on, so we can see your screen, so we can see a big picture of you. That would be
Okay.
great. Just now.
I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Oh, don't worry about it then. We have a great question here from Izuki, or I don't know, these these okay, so why
Okay.
is the PFLP so involved in human rights groups? Do you know
Well,
that?
yes, we've had this. Created this investigation ourselves. The problem appears to be, like we said, how can it be that a recognized terrorist organization is so involved in human rights groups? And the answer is they have found a new way of funding. We call it the halo effect, where an organization uses this halo of human rights. They put up their name, they claim that we're a human rights organization. It's unquestioned, and then after a certain amount of time, they start receiving large amounts of foreign cash. Unfortunately, it's a problem that not many people are willing to address.
So are we Danish taxpayer, are we giving Danish taxpayer money to active PFLP terrorists? Do we know anything about that, or is that too guessing?
Uh, yeah, okay. So everything that I spoke about previously, again, according to the Israeli court, Shaun Sacks, the director of Al-Haq, has been a member of the PFLP. Raji Surani, the director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, acknowledged that he was a member of the PFLP. Khalida Jarrah, the vice chairperson of Adamir, is a member of the PFLP. She acknowledges it. And in fact, she's currently awaiting trial again in Israel for her membership in the PFLP. Now, are these organizations funding terrorism? Well, that's probably for the government to decide. And it's very troubling that the Danish government hasn't actually looked into this before.
Yeah, that's very troubling. Do you think they could find out? I mean, I think when I think about these people working in Copenhagen and they are busy with the whole world, and it's actually a very small part of Danish taxpayer money going to these places. I don't think they have enough time to look at it. So couldn't I mean,
Well,
can we help them there?
unfortunately, I think we can definitely provide information, but I also think that unfortunately that's not a good enough answer. As Whether it comes to the Danish Foreign Ministry or the Danish Ministry of Development, it is the responsibility of the people working there to make sure that Danish money and Danish taxpayer money is going to support causes that Denmark sees as appropriate. And if these organizations are doing things that are against Danish interests, or in some cases blatantly against Danish desires for a negotiated peace settlement, well, it is the duty of the people working on behalf of Danish taxpayers to make sure that this doesn't happen. If that means doing more research or inviting other organizations or people to give evidence, it is their duty to do it. Unfortunately, we see cases in other governments where not only are they unwilling to do this, but the reality is that many of the decision makers will face severe scrutiny for allowing funding to go to organizations that openly contradict Danish policy.
Okay, but it felt like when you and I were together, and also with Dina Grossman, who's watching, it was hard to have the politicians really care about this issue. We had to also just forgetting we the thing that Anna Samuelsen, our foreign minister, when he said now we have to look at it, um, that took a lot of effort and a lot of time. and it had to be a public scandal here in Denmark for a couple of days before uh, he announced that he would make this investigation.
So yeah, the truth is, very often it seems that politicians may be unwilling to take enough effort or take enough risks for this to happen. But this is where the citizenry comes in. We're talking about your money here. We're talking about your taxpayer, and we're talking about actions that directly contradict Danish foreign policy. So it is the duty and responsibility of the politicians to start acting. It won't be long before more and more of these type of things come out. Already, it proved to be very embarrassing for the Danish Foreign Ministry that they've been funding this organization for years, and only now they realize that there's a problem. Where were you 4 years ago when this issue was first brought up? Why did it take blatant actions for the Danish government to actually realize, well, maybe we shouldn't fund these guys, after they'd already earmarked nearly 8 million for a new project? In some cases, it's blatantly wrong and inappropriate that the Danish government aren't acting. And I think, again, I'm sorry to put all the pressure on you as citizenry, but Danish citizens need to make their politicians aware of this.
We have a lot of work to do, and I'm this is we're getting a lot of help from you and from NGO Monitor, and I really appreciate it because you give us, first of all, this talk, but you have helped us through a couple of years now, and also on the homepage where you get a lot of information. I think I think the problem for us is to digest it all and to find those 4 or 5 things um, that really work in Denmark. And I know you can't help us with that, but I think that is what the pro-Israel community should really look at. Um, I think that would be a good thing because this school, that this woman's school named after Dalal Mughrabi, a terrorist with who had actually killed people. That was a story that was so big that it went through um, to all Danes, I think. So we have another pretty big story right now where two different uh, um, uh, city hall politicians in two different Danish cities are being heavily criticized for arguing that Zionists, that Israelis, are behind Daesh, are behind ISIS. So maybe if you do you know if some of these conspiracies regarding ISIS are being peddled, are being forwarded by some of these organizations.
So this specific conspiracy theory, while I do hear it a lot and I see it a lot on social media, I'll be very honest, I haven't seen it being peddled by any of the organizations I've just spoken about or any of the other Danish funded organizations. But it brings up something very interesting with regards to Israel that I see a lot. Um, Very often we say many people confuse anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and I'll be one of the first people to say yes. Occasionally there is a difference. People who are anti-Israel can be anti-Zionist and not necessarily anti-Semitism. But more and more we're seeing hate for Jews and old anti-Semitism being masked in anti-Zionism. And suddenly it gives itself a kind of kosher stamp. No, no, no. I don't hate Jews. I'm not an anti-Semite. It's anti-Zionism. It's the state of Israel that I don't like. And then we look at some of the accusations that are being made. And some of the more troubling ones basically switch old anti-Semitic tropes and use them and put in the word Zionist instead of Jews. And I think this is one of them. Anything that goes wrong in the world, any major source of evil in the world, suddenly, no, it's connected to the Zionists. anything that Israel tries to do right. For example, Israel's record with the LGBT community. Tomorrow in Jerusalem, there'll be a gay pride march. And yes, it is controversial, and Israel does have a lot of work to do with regards to reconciling appropriately with the LGBT community. But I think in the grand scheme of things, we're doing pretty well. But when it comes to detractors of Israel, suddenly Israel's record with regards to the gay community is called pinkwashing. We're hiding what we're doing wrong by playing up our record with the gay community. So here is another example of everything Israel does right. Suddenly, no, there's an evil twist to it. There used to be the old trope where Jews used to be accused of being incapable of doing anything good because there was something evil behind it. So here again, Israel is incapable of doing good because there's something evil or sinister behind it. These are very troubling aspects that come up over and over again and are hidden behind the cloak of anti-Zionism, but the reality is far more sinister.
So, going back to these organizations that that Danish taxpayers, my money is funding, who are they? Are they targeting? Are they talking to normal Palestinians with all this right of return, or are they who are they talking to? Who gets the? Are they making flyers? Are they making TV commercials? Who are they talking to?
Well, it's a combination. Many of these organizations focus inwards. They lobby inwards. For example, Badil does a lot of work inwardly where they promote the right of return. They actively work on behalf of BDS. Many of these organizations will promote BDS within the Palestinian Authority. The example that I brought up previously of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, they're lobbying within Palestinian society to ensure that terrorists continue to be funded by the Palestinian Authority. That's work they're doing inwardly. They want to make sure that Palestinians lobby on behalf of Palestinian prisoners, and they're telling Palestinians that if terrorists don't get their money, it's a violation of human rights. At the same time, these organizations also have massive apparatus that are working with overseas, whether it's lobbying in Denmark, lobbying at the European Union, lobbying at the United Nations, and lobbying and activities at the International Criminal Court. All of these things are being done with your money.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most craziest things that I've learned from you, that I am paying for my own politicians in Europe and in Denmark to be lobbied against the policies that my own country has. No matter who I agree with or disagree with, it's crazy.
Yes, there's no other way to answer that but yes. And it actually gets a little more bizarre when we look at some documentation that comes out. For example, every year, the European Union office here in Israel puts out what they call their head of missions report, where all the various EU ambassadors that are stationed here come together and they write a report about their policy recommendations and what they see happening here on the ground. Whenever we get a look at this document that's supposed to be secretive, but it's always leaked invariably to these same NGOs, and then we're able to get a copy, we almost see copy and paste where certain NGOs will make claims against Israel, and then these exact quotes, sometimes even with the errors in it, not only necessarily statistical errors, but also grammatical errors, are copied word for word into policy recommendations made by the ambassadors, and then these recommendations go to the EU and make their way to the Danish Foreign Ministry. So yes, we have not only the ministers, but we have a case where, as Danish taxpayers, you're paying organizations to write documentation, to lobby Denmark, and that results in more money going to these same organizations to continue lobbying for more money.
That's even more crazy.
It's the reality that we're trying to face.
But let's go. I just want to. We're almost an hour in, and you gotta get some nice time with your family and watching great Israeli TV. So let's talk about the damage done by, for example, an organization like Badil about the right of return. In my opinion, if every single Palestinian wants the right of return of every single Palestinian air quote refugees, every single person who was displaced during the wars, and all of their children in perpetuate for all time come back to Israel proper, that's the right of return?
That's what they claim the right of return should be. Now, if you want to speak about practical terms, the refugee issue, the fact that there are 3 million registered Palestinian refugees around the world, nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees registered around the world, is a major concern for Palestinians and for Israelis. And whether we like it or not, it's something that does need to be discussed. The hardline position within the Palestinian group will be, well, every single Palestinian and their children and their grandchildren, doesn't matter where they're living and what they've done, needs to come back to their original place in Israel and replace the Jewish state of Israel with a Palestinian state. Clearly, as Israelis, we can't let that happen. We don't want our state to be wiped out. But there are other issues that need to be discussed. Why are these Palestinians still regarded as refugees into the third generation? Why are Palestinian refugees the only refugees in the world that carry refugee status into a third generation? Why are Palestinian refugees still treated as refugees and put in squalor and horrible camps in places like Jordan? Why are they facing terrible persecution in Syria? Why is there only one United Nations organization that deals with refugees around the world? Doesn't matter who they are. But then another entirely separate United Nations organization that only deals with Palestinian refugees. These are serious issues and serious discussions that need to be brought up between Israelis, between Palestinians, and the international community. But when you have Danish funding going to a hardline organization like Badil that's saying, no, this isn't up for discussion. This isn't about negotiation. This isn't about anything else other than every single Palestinian refugee and their children and their grandchildren and everything else have to come back to Israel and wipe out the Jewish state of Israel. That is doing major damage, not only to the peace process, not only to Palestinians, not only to Israelis, but it is hampering any attempts by Denmark to find a negotiated peace settlement.
And see, this is where, and this is very hard to explain to people because it's very complicated. But if I should try and formulate this, maybe you will agree, or you're welcome to disagree. So if we are, the day we are very close to peace, the day we have Palestinian leadership that is ready to make peace, the Palestinian leadership would have to explain to the Palestinians a lot of stuff. Of course, don't kill Jews. We're done with that. Don't do terror. But also, this whole right of return thing, we can't have that. So you have to roll back all the campaigns that organizations like Badil are doing. They're not prepping the Palestinians for peace. They're making it harder. So I was just saying what you're saying in my words.
Yes, I think what you said there at the end is very important. That all this Danish money that is going to apparent human rights groups is making peace more difficult. And that is the issue.
And that's horrible. That's,
Yeah.
that's simply horrible that my money is being, because I love Israel. I'm Israeli. But but this is hurting Palestinians. Every day without peace is hurting the Palestinians, in my opinion. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it won't be so nice to live in a Palestinian state either. We see what happens in Gaza when Hamas takes over, but I would think that every person would be better off with a peaceful solution here.
Yes, look, at the end of the day, we all want some type of negotiated solution. But the issue is always going to be coming back to the fact that Danish funding is going to organizations that are actively working against a real negotiated peace. And that's a shame. And that needs to stop.
Thank you so much, Shaun. Everybody, this is Shaun Sacks live, and it has been a lot of fun. This was the first time that we in Dialogue Center, the Forum for Dialogue on Israel, we will be having Shaun again in a couple of months. I hope you will join us again.
Looking forward to it.
We'll have more people coming up, and this has been a lot of fun and really interesting. I will post this video will be available. I will put in Danish translation subtitles. Give me a couple of weeks, it will come, and I'll also put up your slideshow on the homepage in a couple of
Thank
weeks.
you.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.